At my thesis defense, I expected questions. What I didn't expect was my boyfriend walking in mid-presentation and proposing to someone else. In front of the entire faculty. They stole my spotlight. Then they stole my award. But I didn't fall apart. I walked away, built my own name, and married the man who helped me rise from the ashes. Not by saving me, but by standing beside me. I had always imagined my thesis defense would be the proudest moment of my academic life. Not the most humiliating. Not the kind of thing whispered about in elevators, posted to anonymous gossip forums, or turned into viral TikToks before I even had a chance to walk out the door. But there I was. Standing at the front of Gallery 405, Columbia University's most prestigious architecture lecture hall, my palms damp against the polished wood podium. Behind me, my final project played out in digital motion, designing for displacement, urban sanctuaries for the unhoused, rendered in crisp white lines and warm lighting across a projected cityscape. I'd worked on it for 8 months straight. 18-hour days. Lost weekends. Crying over render errors. Sketching elevation lines on my forearms when no paper was nearby. And I'd done it while juggling a part-time job and managing the Columbia Women in Design Society. This was supposed to be my moment. Ryan sat in the front row. His eyes met mine as I wrapped up my closing argument. He gave me that easy, dimpled smile I'd fallen for sophomore year. The same smile he'd used to talk me into gelato on cold nights and naps in the library basement when finals became too much. "Thank you," I said, voice steady. "I'm open to questions." There was a beat of silence. Professor Nguyen scribbled something down. Dr. Ames reached for her glasses. The tension in the room began to melt as hands went up. And then Ryan stood. I blinked. He wasn't a faculty member. He wasn't even part of the academic panel. He was just Ryan, my boyfriend. The one who'd brought me soup through 4 studio all-nighters. Who'd said he couldn't wait to see my name on the dean's honors board. "Excuse me," he said loudly enough that several professors turned. "Before we go any further, I'd like to say something." I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. "Please no." He turned, facing the room now, and for a moment I thought he was going to compliment me. Congratulate me. Do something mildly embarrassing but forgivable the way lovers sometimes do in movies. Then he knelt and pulled out a ring. My stomach dropped straight to the floor. "Maya's presentation was incredible," he began, his voice ringing out confidently. "But it reminded me how short life is. How precious. How rare it is to find someone you want to build a future with." My vision tunneled. No. "Iris Lynn," he said, turning away from me, "will you marry me?" Time shattered. There was a gasp behind me. A professor dropped their pen. I turned slowly as if some part of me had misunderstood. But there was Iris. My classmate. My academic rival. The girl who had once asked to borrow my laptop charger and never returned it. Iris Lynn. Looking shocked. Then bashful. Then smiling. I couldn't breathe. She stood. Hands to her face like she was about to cry, like this was some Nicholas Sparks film and she was the star. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Yes. Ryan, yes." People clapped. People clapped. I stood frozen behind the podium while my thesis flickered uselessly behind me. Dr. Ames cleared her throat. "This is highly irregular." "I know," Ryan said, standing now, sliding the ring onto Iris's finger as if I weren't 3 feet away. "But life doesn't always wait for ceremony, right?" The committee exchanged looks. Students in the back whispered behind their laptops. The guy with the camera, part of the AV team, zoomed in, adjusting his lens to capture the moment. Iris held her hand aloft like she'd just been crowned. The diamond glinted under the gallery lights. I felt cold. Professor Nguyen looked at me uncertainly. "Maya? Shall we, resume?" I couldn't move. My eyes locked on Ryan. He had the audacity to look at me then. As if expecting me to smile. As if this hadn't just been my moment. As if I hadn't poured every cell in my body into the project now dimming behind me while his public betrayal took the spotlight. I placed my note cards gently on the podium. Picked up the flash drive. Unplugged it. And walked. Past the podium. Past Iris still fluttering and giggling. Past Ryan, who reached out for me muttering something I didn't hear. I didn't stop. Not until I was out of the gallery. Not until the heavy oak doors slammed behind me with a finality that vibrated through my spine. The hallway was silent. A strange, perfect stillness. I stood in the middle of it, my breath ragged, clutching my flash drive like it could tether me to reality. Then slowly I sat on the floor. My black blazer felt too tight. My heels pinched. My lungs wouldn't expand. The sound of applause still echoed in my ears like some cruel hallucination. He had proposed. To her. At my thesis defense. The one day I had waited for since the day I walked into Columbia as a terrified freshman. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even call anyone. I just sat there. I had no idea how much time passed before someone opened the door down the hall. A janitor. He glanced at me unsure, then wheeled his cart in the opposite direction. Smart. The ache didn't come in waves. It came all at once like a dam breaking. Not because I'd lost him, but because he'd stolen this from me. This moment. This victory. And Iris, how long had it been going on? How many whispered conversations in studio corners? How many stolen glances across lecture halls while I worked late to finish his portfolio drafts? I stood. I couldn't stay here. Not in this hallway. Not in this university. Not like this. I pulled out my phone. Dozens of messages already. Classmates. Group chats. A DM from Iris with a ring emoji and, hope this doesn't ruin our friendship, red heart. I deleted it without replying. Then I turned my phone off. And walked away. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know what came next. But I knew one thing. I would never be the girl who was proposed around again. The silence in my apartment was oppressive. Not peaceful, not quiet, just heavy. The kind of silence that has weight, that presses against your ribs and makes you forget what it's like to feel comfortable in your own space. I hadn't spoken to anyone since I left the defense. My phone was off, tucked into the freezer, because the fridge wasn't far enough away. I wasn't ready for the messages, the pings, the questions. I couldn't stand to see that someone had posted the video already. I couldn't survive watching myself be humiliated on loop from 3 different angles. I sat at my kitchen counter in sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, chewing the inside of my cheek while staring at the only thing I'd kept open, my laptop. My final design files were still open, still glowing in perfect, sterile lines. The city I had dreamed up stood tall on the screen. Felt like a ghost now. I was supposed to celebrate tonight. I was supposed to be drunk off champagne, dancing in bare feet with my friends on our rooftop, laughing about Professor Nguyen's impossible questions and talking about job offers. Instead, I just poured cereal into a coffee mug and left it there untouched. My email inbox blinked with new messages. Professors, classmates, a few polite notes from the faculty board, all variations of "we're so sorry the presentation was disrupted." One even had the audacity to say, "What a moment. You'll never forget it." No, I wouldn't. At around midnight, when the world outside my windows had settled into late-night hush, a new email arrived. No subject line. No introduction. Just, from julian.beaumont@columbia.edu. To maya.patel@columbia.edu. Time, 11:59 p.m. You weren't meant to win. If you want to know why, meet me tomorrow. Jerome Green Hall, 2nd floor, office 204. 10 a.m. JB. I read it twice. Julian Beaumont? The name sparked something. I'd heard it before in snippets, in whispered jokes and smug shrugs. The dean's son. Graduate of the law school. Doesn't practice law but somehow still shows up on alumni panels. Showy cars. Legacy student. Rumored to have a stake in a private firm. Untouchable. We'd never spoken directly. But I remembered him now. Tall, sharp-jawed, always dressed like he'd just walked off the cover of GQ's Power issue. I'd seen him once at a university gala, standing beside Dean Beaumont like he'd been carved out of old money and sharper ambition. Why would he be emailing me? I stared at the message. You weren't meant to win. Win what? The award? The post-graduation fellowship? My own defense? And why the hell would Julian Beaumont know anything about it? I clicked over to Google, typing his name. His LinkedIn page came up first. Harvard undergrad, Columbia Law, managing partner at some vague-sounding firm called Beaumont Strategies. 0 posts. Dozens of connections. His last activity was a like on a recent article about institutional ethics in academia. I closed the tab. My stomach knotted. Was this a joke? A trap? Another stunt like Ryan's? I almost deleted the email. But then I thought about Iris's smug smile. About the way she had reached for Ryan's hand without even looking at me. About the way the professors had glanced around, uncertain, when the attention shifted away from me. No one had stopped him. No one had spoken up. I opened a new email. To julian.beaumont@columbia.edu. Subject, no subject. I'll be there. Maya. By the time I arrived at Jerome Green Hall the next morning, I felt half human and half caffeine. The law school wing was colder than the architecture building, steel and marble everywhere designed to intimidate. I checked the plaque beside office 204 twice before knocking. The door opened almost immediately. Right on time, Julian Beaumont said, stepping aside to let me in. The room was smaller than I expected. No massive desk, no floor-to-ceiling view, just neat bookshelves, 2 chairs, and a minimalist painting of the New York skyline in grayscale. Julian himself looked exactly as I remembered. Crisp navy suit, no tie, sleeves rolled to the elbow. His hair was too perfect. His posture too relaxed. I hesitated near the threshold. "Come in," he said, closing the door behind me. "Sit." I did. He sat opposite, watching me with sharp, assessing eyes that made me feel like a question he already knew the answer to. "I take it you're wondering why I emailed you," he said. "That's one way to put it." He nodded once, then leaned forward, placing a slim file folder on the table between us. "Your project was good. Very good. In fact, by the committee's own scoring rubric, you were first." I blinked. "How do you know that?" "I have access," he said simply. "My father is Dean Beaumont, remember?" "Right. The vote already happened. It was finalized 2 days before your defense," he said, opening the folder. "They've already decided to give the thesis fellowship to Iris Lynn." My pulse thudded in my ears. "But the results haven't been announced," I said. "No one said anything." "Because they wait until after the defense presentations are done. Makes it look fair." Julian's voice was clipped. "But the decision was rigged before you ever stepped up to that podium." I leaned back slowly, his words wrapping around me like cold water. "They knew?" I asked. "They knew I deserved it and gave it to her anyway?" He gave a half smile. "There was a vote. 3-2. Ewin and Ames fought for you. The other 3 caved." "Because of the donation?" He didn't answer. But his silence said enough. "Ryan knew," I whispered. "He had to have known." Julian tilted his head. "There's more." He pulled a printed email from the folder. I didn't recognize the sender, but I recognized the body text. It was a request for Ryan to not be present at the thesis defenses unless cleared by the student. I hadn't cleared him. He had pushed his way in anyway. "They were warned," Julian said. "But someone from Iris's team vouched for him." I didn't speak for a full minute. Julian studied me like I was a chessboard he had already solved. But not unkindly. Finally, I met his eyes. "Why do you care?" He shrugged once. "Because watching the wrong people win never stops being disgusting. And because people like Ryan, like Iris, they think they can rewrite everyone's story to make themselves the protagonist. And you're what? Some kind of academic vigilante." A smile twitched at the corner of his mouth. "Hardly. I just like fair fights." I exhaled. My hands were trembling again and I hadn't noticed. "You came to me," he said softly, "because part of you knew it wasn't just the proposal. It was everything behind it. The way no one stood up. The way the room turned cold. They didn't silence you. They erased you." I looked away. His words shouldn't have made me want to cry. But they did. "I'm offering you clarity," he said. "What you do with it is up to you." I stood abruptly. The file folder remained on the table. "Why now?" I asked. "Why not just leak it? Or confront the board?" Julian stood too. He was taller than I remembered. Still impossibly composed. "Because if I do it, it's a headline," he said. "If you do it, it's justice." My pulse pounded in my ears. "I'm not a headline," I said quietly. "No," he said. "You're the correction." I walked out of his office in a daze, the folder clutched against my chest like armor. The hallway looked different now. Not colder. Just realer. I reached the bottom of the stairs and sat on the stone ledge outside the building, flipping open the folder. Inside were timelines. Emails. Committee notes. The rubric scores. A printout of the university's ethics policy. At the very bottom in Julian's handwriting, one line. They underestimated you. That's their first mistake. Don't make it yours too. I stared at it, then pulled out my phone. I turned it on for the first time in 2 days. Dozens of messages rolled in. I ignored them. Instead, I opened a blank email. To julian.beaumont@columbia.edu. Subject: I'm not done. I'll fight. But not for revenge. For what I earned. Maya. It was amazing how quickly you could become a legend at a university. Not for awards, not for research, but for being the girl whose boyfriend hijacked her thesis defense to propose to someone else. By Monday morning, I had 3 new nicknames in circulation. PowerPoint dumped girl, the proposal ghost, and architect of her own downfall. None of them hurt as much as the original memory did. So I did what girls like me are taught to do. I smiled. At the library, when classmates asked how I was holding up, I smiled and said, "Oh, just busy." At the cafe near the studio, when the barista leaned in and said, "Girl, you were done dirty," I just chuckled and said, "Yeah, it's all a little surreal." I wore makeup every day. Not because I wanted to, but because no one asks if you're crying when your eyeliner's perfect. The pain had dulled into a sort of white noise. It followed me into every room but no longer screamed. I told myself I didn't care that Iris hadn't reached out. That Ryan hadn't texted. That the university hadn't issued a statement. That my advisor hadn't mentioned the awards ceremony at all. And then Julian texted. "Julian B. You owe me a coffee. Tomorrow, I'll bring the truth. You bring whatever fake smile you've been practicing." 9 a.m. Café Tay, corner of 116th. Café Tay was a hole-in-the-wall place where law students went to argue over torts and moral philosophy. It wasn't where I expected Julian Beaumont to spend his mornings. But he was already seated when I arrived. Black turtleneck, charcoal wool coat draped over the chair, laptop closed beside a small cup of espresso. No phone in sight. No entourage. Just him. "You're early," I said as I sat down across from him. "I'm always early," he replied, sliding a fresh cup of coffee toward me without asking how I take it. I took a sip. "Perfect. You do know that most people don't use coffee dates as war councils," I said. He shrugged. "We're not most people." I raised an eyebrow. "Right. I forgot. You're Julian Beaumont. You live above all mortal affairs. Only on Thursdays." His mouth curved into something dangerously close to a grin. We were quiet for a moment. The clinking of spoons and murmurs of other conversations buzzed in the background like white noise. Julian leaned back in his chair. "So, let's talk options." "You mean escape routes?" He nodded. "First option. Take the loss, graduate, disappear into a respectable firm, pretend none of it happened. Pass. Option 2. File a formal grievance. It'll take a year. Maybe 2. Your name will get dragged, your funding will vanish, and the university will likely stonewall until it fizzles out." I didn't reply. He waited, then offered the third. "Option 3, he said slowly, "is you rebuild. Better. Louder. You create something they can't ignore and you do it on your terms." I studied him. "Why are you helping me, Julian?" "You keep asking that," he said. "The real question is, why are you so sure no one would?" The words hit harder than I expected. I stared at the rim of my cup. Because when Ryan stood up and turned my defense into a stunt, no one stopped him. When Iris smiled like she was owed it, no one looked confused. And when I walked out, no one followed. He was quiet. Then, "Do you know what I saw when I watched that video?" "You watched it." "Of course I did," he said. "It's practically a case study in strategic humiliation." That stung. He held up a hand. But what I saw wasn't someone destroyed. I saw someone who walked out on her own feet. Who didn't break. That matters. I wasn't sure what to say to that. Julian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a key. It was attached to a black leather tag stamped with a gold 27. "Studio space," he said. "Soho. 5th floor. Belongs to my firm. No one's using it right now." I looked at the key but didn't reach for it. "Why?" "Because you need a place where people don't see you as a viral moment. And because you work better when your back is against the wall." He slid it closer. I picked it up. "Is this charity?" "Hardly. I expect updates. I expect fire." I laughed softly. "You sound like my advisor." Julian's expression flickered. "She voted against you." The laugh caught in my throat. "Oh. She's a friend of the Lin family, he added quietly. You were never going to win under her. I looked away, staring out the cafe window at students rushing past with their tote bags and thesis folders. They took everything, I said. No, Julian said. They took a moment. Not your work. Not your mind. Not your ability to change the conversation. I looked back at him. His jaw was set, eyes steady. And something inside me shifted. Just slightly. The studio was cold the first time I stepped in. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a quiet stretch of Soho. The walls were exposed brick, the floors concrete. A single work table stood in the center like a stage awaiting a performance. No cameras. No whispering classmates. No reminders of the proposal. Just light and silence. I set my sketchbook down and pulled my hair back. And for the first time in over a week I picked up a pencil. Julian texted that night. Julian B. Studio okay? Maya. Feels like I'm haunting it. But yeah, it's okay. Julian B. You'll fill it. Eventually. I stared at the screen. Then typed. Maya. Why did you really give me the key? His reply came instantly. Julian B. Because you looked like you were about to disappear. And I didn't want that to be the last thing I saw you do. The days blurred. There was no thesis to refine anymore, no faculty meetings to attend, no campus gossip I hadn't already lived through. But the studio Julian gave me became something like a lifeline. A place outside of memory, outside of shame. It smelled like cold concrete and fresh pencil lead, and for once that was enough. I sketched like I was trying to draw silence. Lines on paper, structures that didn't have names yet. Not homes, not libraries, not spaces with walls, but ideas. Forms that breathed. Concepts that whispered. Julian didn't ask questions. But supplies kept arriving. A delivery of new tracing paper. A set of Faber-Castell pens I hadn't ordered. Printer ink. Then a cutting mat. When I texted him to ask if he was running an invisible assistant service, he replied. Julian B. What you build will speak louder than any lawsuit ever could. Let's make sure it looks perfect. He never hovered. Never showed up unannounced. He was quiet support, typed words, and cool logic when I spiraled. 2 weeks in, Claire Montgomery, a former studio classmate, dropped by. She took one look at my storyboard wall and whistled. Are you competing? She asked, eyes wide. I shrugged. Maybe. She laughed. Why? You don't just accidentally enter the Soni Prize. That's the most prestigious architectural competition in Europe. I haven't submitted anything yet. But you're thinking about it. I didn't answer. But we both knew. The Soni Prize was invitation-based. Only 20 designers under 30 were selected to submit entries for a speculative design challenge. Envision a structure that represents urban healing. Winners were flown to Paris for the gala. The top 3 would receive a 6-month international residency. 2 nights later, an email arrived in my inbox. Subject: Soni Prize nomination, Maya Patel. We are pleased to confirm your nomination has been accepted. Materials due, April 15th. Submission sponsor, J. Beaumont. I stared at the screen for a long time. No text from Julian. No calls. No explanation. Just the offer. I confronted him the next morning. He was seated in a corner booth at Café Tay again, like no time had passed. I didn't ask you to sponsor me. No, but you would have talked yourself out of it. I crossed my arms. You know, sometimes I wonder if you're helping me or managing me. Julian took a slow sip of his espresso. What's the difference if the result is the same? That's not an answer. Fine, he said, leaning forward. I nominated you because you're the most talented designer I've seen come through Columbia in the last decade. And because watching you prove them wrong will be the most satisfying thing I do all year. I blinked. Then sat down. He slid over a folder. Inside, the submission guidelines, contacts for exhibition space, and a non-disclosure agreement I'd need to sign if my work was selected for gallery display. Did you draft this too? I edit for fun. You're a menace. You're welcome. We shared a small, unintentional smile. And something in the air shifted just slightly. For the first time, the silence between us didn't feel tactical. It felt comfortable. He studied me. You still think I'm doing this out of pity? No, I admitted. Not anymore. Then let's build something better. In the weeks that followed, I did just that. My design, which began as abstract sketches, slowly crystallized. I called it Threshold. A building made to look like it was mid-construction and mid-deconstruction all at once. Glass walls with fractured lines. Staircases that led to observation platforms instead of rooms. A structure about the process of rebuilding, not the result. I poured every unsaid word into it. And yet, as focused as I was, I couldn't stop my thoughts from drifting sometimes. To Ryan. To the way he'd smiled at Iris in that moment. How he'd reached out for me as if I were the interruption. I started noticing things I hadn't seen before. How he'd always called my ambitions cute when I pulled all-nighters. How he gently suggested I tone down my critiques during studio reviews so I wouldn't intimidate the faculty. How he'd forgotten to show up for the Women in Design fundraiser, twice. In retrospect, it hadn't just been betrayal. It had been erosion. Slow, careful erosion of my confidence disguised as concern. And I'd called it love. It was late one Friday when I heard the knock. The sun had long dipped below the skyline. My sketches were pinned to every available inch of wall, and I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, sorting through material samples. I wasn't expecting anyone. I opened the door. And there he was. Ryan. Looking exactly the same and nothing like I remembered. His hair was longer, messier. The same gray coat he'd worn to my defense hung loosely from his frame. And in his eyes, something new. Panic, regret, manipulation. I didn't say a word. Maya, he said, voice breaking. Can we talk? No. He blinked. No, he repeated like the concept was foreign. I stepped aside just enough to let the studio behind me come into view. Do you see this space? It's mine. Not ours. Not something you get to walk into with apologies and explanations. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets. I made a mistake. Which part? I asked coldly. The part where you sabotaged my defense? The part where you colluded with Iris's family? Or the part where you decided your ego was more important than my work? He looked wounded. I didn't know she was going to say yes right then. I thought. You thought what? I snapped. That you'd cause a scene and I'd still come back to you? That humiliating me in front of my mentors would make me grateful when you chose someone else. His silence was answer enough. I stepped forward, voice low. You didn't love me, Ryan. You loved the idea of me loving you. You liked being the sun in someone else's sky. And when I started building my own universe, you panicked. He flinched. You're not welcome here, I said. Not in this studio. Not in my life. He tried one more time. I just wanted to explain. I'm not your closure. I shut the door. Locked it. Then stood still for a long time, hands pressed to the wood. My chest heaved once. Not from sadness but from relief. I was free. I returned to my sketch desk. The pencil in my hand was shaking, so I set it down. On the floor beside me was a page I didn't remember drawing. A portrait sketch. Jawline. Eyes. A mouth tilted in a smirk. Ryan. My hand had made it without thinking. I tore it in half. Then in half again. Then I picked up a blank sheet and began again. Lines sharper, darker. The structure rising on the page had a center that split open, like a building rupturing to make space for new light. For the first time, I was designing something I didn't want anyone to approve of. I just wanted it to exist. The email arrived at 4:42 a.m. Subject: Solene Prize, Finalist Selection. Ms. Patel, congratulations. Your submission threshold has advanced to the final presentation round of the Solene Prize. You are invited to present your concept in Paris on May 12th. Details and itinerary attached. Your submission sponsor, Mr. Julian Beaumont, has been notified. I sat frozen on my studio floor, blinking at the screen. The concrete beneath me felt suddenly warmer, like my body had absorbed the news before my mind did. Finalist. Paris. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. For a full minute I didn't breathe. Then I whispered to the empty studio, "Holy shit." Julian didn't text. He showed up. 2 hours later he appeared at my studio door holding 2 coffees and a plane ticket. "You have 36 hours, he said, handing me the espresso and a file. "Passport ready?" I was still in yesterday's hoodie. "Did you pull strings?" He raised an eyebrow. "I'm flattered you think I have that much influence in French design circles." I opened the file. Flight confirmation. Hotel details. A speaking slot at 4 p.m., May 12th, Musée de l'Architecture et du Patrimoine. A floor plan of the exhibit space. A stage diagram. I looked up at him. You really think I can win this? Julian's voice dropped an octave. I don't sponsor anything I don't intend to bet on. The flight was long but smooth. I spent most of it editing render images and second-guessing everything I'd ever drawn. Julian read a biography of Jean Nouvel, underlining in fountain pen. Every so often he'd glance at my screen and mutter, "Raise the transparency here," or, "That line wants to lead to tension, let it." He never hovered. Case helped. We landed at Charles de Gaulle at 6:10 a.m. local time. Paris was washed in gray light and wet cobblestones. The car that met us was sleek, silent, and somehow already stocked with my preferred snacks. Julian's doing. Obviously. When we arrived at Hotel d'Artois, the concierge frowned as she flipped through the booking notes. "I'm terribly sorry," she said in a French accent so smooth it almost softened the blow. "Due to a systems error, the two-room suite has been reassigned." My heart stopped. Julian stepped forward. "What's available?" "A single suite remains," she said. "With 2 bedrooms. Shared common space." Julian glanced at me. "Up to you." I tried to be mature. I really did. "It's fine," I said after a beat. "We're not 16. "Speak for yourself," Julian muttered, signing the check-in forms. The suite was ridiculous. Tall windows framed a view of the Seine. The wallpaper had gold detailing. The armchairs looked like they belonged in Versailles. One bedroom had a clawfoot tub and an oil painting of a woman in a storm. Julian set his briefcase down in the second room and disappeared for a call. I wandered into the main living area. The windows cracked open just enough to let in the spring air. Paris smelled like lemon peels and concrete and tulips in bloom. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months. The presentation wasn't for another day. But I couldn't sleep. At midnight, I padded barefoot into the shared sitting room, notebook in hand. Julian was already there, on the balcony, sleeves rolled up, sipping from a heavy glass. "You're awake," he said, not turning around. "So are you." He held up the drink. "Celebratory bourbon. You always celebrate before the event?" He finally looked at me. "You already won." I raised an eyebrow. "You turned ruin into architecture," he said simply. "You made grief a design language." I flushed. "You're really good at compliments that sound like diagnoses." Julian smiled, not the sharp kind he gave in public but something softer. "You've changed," he said after a moment. "I had to." He nodded. Then quietly, "That's what scares me." I frowned. "Why?" "Because you're burning so brightly I don't think anyone could touch you without getting scorched." We were quiet. The city below glimmered, gold light on stone, bridges stretched like arms across the river. "Do you ever miss who you were before?" I asked. Julian took a breath. "Sometimes. But that version of me wouldn't have met you." The air thickened between us. He stepped forward, setting the glass on the iron railing. I looked up. He looked down. Our faces were inches apart. The Paris air smelled like thunder about to break. Then he stepped back. "Not like this," he said, voice hoarse. "You deserve to want it without confusion." My throat tightened. "So do you." He hesitated, then turned and walked back into the room, closing the balcony door behind him. I didn't sleep. Not because of nerves, but because I couldn't stop replaying that moment. The almost. The weight of it. I stared out at the skyline until the Eiffel Tower flickered its hourly sparkle. And somewhere between the lights and the silence, I realized something that terrified me more than the presentation. I didn't just want to win anymore. I wanted him to see me do it. The Musée de l'Architecture stood tall above the Seine, its grand arches bathed in sunlight that filtered through stained glass windows. The scent of waxed floors and fresh flowers drifted down the marble hall as the 10 finalists milled backstage. I stood at the edge of the waiting area, running my fingers along the stiff linen edge of my presentation portfolio. Behind the exhibit glass, threshold rose like an abstract cathedral, paper, metal, light. A story in fragments held together by tension. My name was etched into the plaque beside it. Maya Patel. United States. Age 25. Threshold. Julian stood nearby, checking his watch with military precision. His suit was navy with a dark tie. Crisp, immaculate, except for the scuffed heels of his shoes, which only I would have noticed. Made him feel real. "They're ready for you," he said, nodding toward the curator's assistant. I inhaled once, twice. This wasn't the defense. This wasn't New York. This time there was no proposal waiting to steal the room. This time it was mine. The hall was dim except for spotlights on each presenting artist. The chairs were filled with gallery heads, designers, press, and international faculty, faces I'd only seen in magazine profiles and footnotes in academic journals. But when I stepped into the light, I didn't look at them. I looked at Threshold. "This," I began, voice steady, "is not a building meant to house people. It's a building meant to reflect what's left after everything is taken away. What you choose to rebuild from. What you leave behind." I walked the room like it was mine. I let silence linger. I let the discomfort settle. Then I said, "Every part of this was torn down before it was ever lifted. Like a heart. Like a dream. Like a reputation. Pause. It's still standing." When I stepped back, there was a moment of stillness. Then applause. Then more than applause, a standing ovation. The judges. The gallery director. The delegation from Kyoto. Even the French press clapped, which Julian had told me almost never happened. I found Julian outside the main hall 10 minutes later. He was waiting with a glass of champagne and an expression so neutral it bordered on impressed. "You didn't blink once," he said. "I couldn't afford to." He handed me the glass. "They won't forget that." I sipped it, then asked, "Did I actually win anything?" He shrugged. "You won control. The rest is optional." I smiled. "You really know how to ruin a moment." "I try." That evening, the gala was held under the vaulted ceilings of Palais Garnier, chandeliers glinting, violins echoing through the marble ballroom, silver trays of caviar moving silently through crowds in silk gowns and tuxedos. I wore a structured white gown with dramatic shoulder folds and a soft drape along the spine, inspired by the Threshold concept. The fabric shimmered in the light but clung to me like armor. Julian met me at the bottom of the staircase. His gaze didn't linger too long, but long enough. "You clean up okay," I said. I was about to say the same. But better. I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, unsure why my pulse had picked up. "Try not to sound too impressed. You're wearing your own design. And you noticed." "Of course I noticed," he said. "Everyone is noticing." I smiled until I saw them. Ryan and Iris. Standing by the champagne fountain, dressed like paper dolls. His tuxedo tailored within an inch of its life. Her dress a blush satin replica of a gown I'd sketched once and left in a Columbia studio binder. My breath caught. "I didn't know they were invited," I said. Julian's expression hardened. "They're representing the U.S. under a sponsored legacy initiative. It's optics." "Optics," I echoed, bitterness rising in my throat. "Do you want to leave?" he asked softly. "No," I said. "I want to be seen." It didn't take long for them to spot me. Iris froze first. Then Ryan, who recovered faster. He stepped forward, cutting through the crowd, that same soft smirk on his face, like we were still back in New York, sharing a laugh over croissants and floor plans. He reached for my hand. "Maya," he said. "You were amazing. I mean, really. That structure?" "It was." "Let go," I said, not smiling. He paused. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you." "Proud of me?" Like I was a project he'd mentored. Before I could answer, Julian appeared beside me, precise, controlled, devastating in black tie. He offered his hand to Ryan with a neutral smile. "Julian Beaumont. Maya's fiancé." Silence. Iris blinked. Ryan dropped his hand. "Oh," he said. "I didn't realize." "Most people don't," Julian replied smoothly. "Until it's too late." Photographers moved in like sharks scenting blood. I didn't correct him. I didn't deny it. Instead, I reached for Julian's arm and rested my hand there lightly. He glanced down, then back at Ryan. "Pleasure seeing you both," he said with a nod. "But we're late for the next round of judging." There was no next round. But it didn't matter. He steered me away effortlessly, a hand at my lower back, his posture proud enough for two. We didn't speak again until we reached the far end of the hall, where the city lights spilled in through arched windows. "Fiancé?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Julian looked completely unbothered. They needed to know you were no longer someone to pity. I studied him. That wasn't just theater, I said. No, he said quietly. It wasn't. I didn't press. Not then. But when the music swelled and the ballroom lights dimmed for the next award presentation, I didn't look at the stage. I looked at Julian. And he was already watching me. The morning after the gala, my phone was chaos. 27 missed calls. 43 texts. 2 new emails from architectural journals. And one headline that made me drop my croissant in the hotel lobby. Runaway thesis bride debuts fiancé in Paris. And he's a Beaumont. Right below it, the photo. Me and Julian in perfect posture. Our silhouettes framed by the Palais Garnier's chandeliers. His hand rested at the small of my back. My head tilted slightly toward him. I looked like a woman in love. Or at least, a woman who had stopped letting the world define her through betrayal. The image was already everywhere, from Columbia's alumni newsletter to the Instagram Explore page. Julian stood beside me, coffee in hand, already skimming through the coverage like he was reviewing quarterly earnings. Are we mad? He asked, eyes still on his phone. I stared at the screen. They think we're engaged. His lips twitched. We did let them think that. I took a breath. Do we correct it? He met my gaze. Do you want to? A long pause. Then I shook my head. Not yet. Back in New York, the buzz followed us like glitter. Impossible to shake off. The photo of the architect in the air became a symbol in the design world. Not just a love story but a narrative of reclaiming space, of rewriting humiliation into power. Julian was invited to panels he used to avoid. I was invited to 3 guest lectures and an upcoming Women in Architecture symposium. Every time someone congratulated us, Julian would nod with a neutral smile. He didn't push the lie. But he didn't correct it either. The most surreal part? It worked. Iris had deleted her Instagram. Ryan was noticeably absent from every industry event. And Columbia's board quietly postponed the announcement of the thesis fellowship. Apparently, anonymous complaints had come through about voting irregularities. I didn't ask where the complaints came from. I already knew. The fundraiser at the Met was the first time I'd seen Julian in a tux since Paris. He looked, and I hated myself for thinking it, gorgeous. The kind of man who could walk into a scandal and leave with the donors instead. I wore a midnight blue gown with sheer sleeves and a back slit. No necklace. Just statement earrings and a lot of composure. We walked in together. As soon as the cameras clicked, Julian took my hand. It helps the story, he murmured. Of course, I replied. But the warmth of his fingers curled around mine was hard to explain away. During the donor reception, someone asked how we met. Julian replied, she corrected a system I was raised to protect. I smiled like it was rehearsed, but it wasn't. I hadn't known he'd say that. Later, during dinner, he leaned close and whispered, you hate the steak, don't you? I hate being watched, I said. You always are, he replied. Even when no one's looking. I should have pulled away. Instead, I reached under the table and brushed my fingers against his knee. His breath hitched. The tension between us snapped, not in a grand cinematic moment, but in the way his hand moved gently to the nape of my neck as we stood to leave. The way I leaned into it. Outside the hall, under the arches of the museum's entrance, he kissed me. So certain. Like he'd been waiting to get it right. It wasn't performative. There were no cameras. No audience. Just us. When we pulled apart, he said quietly, that one wasn't for them. We didn't speak much during the ride to his apartment. He didn't ask. I didn't explain. But when the elevator doors closed behind us, I kissed him again, harder this time. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't perfectly lit. But it was real. He guided me gently into the apartment, stripped of all its polish, and then he stripped the rest. My gown. His tie. Our control. The night passed in fragments. Skin on skin, breath-catching, laughter where we didn't expect it. A gasp when I traced the scar on his collarbone. A pause when he cupped my face like he meant it. There were no declarations. No promises. But when he pressed his forehead to mine, I heard him whisper, I'm not just helping you fight the past. I want to be your future. I woke just before dawn. The sheets were soft. The room was dim. Julian was asleep beside me, his hand curled loosely near mine but not touching it. He hadn't pulled me close. He hadn't caged me. But he'd stayed. I rolled onto my side and stared at the skyline through the narrow window slit. Everything had changed. And none of it felt fake anymore. The headline landed like a punch to the gut. The real story behind Colombia's architect queen. Nepotism, nudity, and narrative control. By Iris Lynn. Beneath it, a long, breathless blog post filled with passive-aggressive jabs and outright lies. I read it twice just to make sure. Then I read it again, slower, until the words stopped looking like language and started sounding like venom. We were once friends. Not all of us have powerful men ready to sponsor our careers. Some of us don't get to rebrand heartbreak into headlines. Maya Patel used her relationship with Julian Beaumont to climb out of her own academic failure. She didn't win. She staged a better story. I was still sitting at the kitchen island in Julian's apartment when he walked in, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a brown paper bag with the bakery's logo on it. He paused the second he saw my face. What happened? I turned the laptop around. He scanned it in silence, jaw tightening with every paragraph. By the end he set the coffee down and said one word. War. The fallout was fast and brutal. 3 of my upcoming sponsorship meetings were suddenly rescheduled indefinitely. One publication pulled a profile that had been slated to run next week. The Women in Design committee went radio silent. And the worst part? I saw it in people's eyes again, that flicker of doubt. That wondering if I had in fact ridden someone else's power. That maybe I hadn't earned any of it. The same doubt they'd handed me at my thesis defense. Julian didn't ask for permission. He went straight to strategy. First, we leak the faculty rubric, he said that night, his whiteboard already covered in arrows and bullet points. Then we push the email records. I've got 3 internal correspondences that show Iris's father donated mid-vote. We'll attach timestamps. I stared at him. How do you have all this? I'm a Beaumont, he replied. I don't fight fair. I fight prepared. By the end of the week, the truth began surfacing. An anonymous Dropbox link made its way to several major outlets. Inside were scanned scorecards from the original Columbia thesis evaluations. My name had scored the highest. The vote had been split 3-2 in my favor, until one faculty member mysteriously flipped sides after the Lynn family's contribution. Then came the leaked emails. A polite exchange between the dean's office and Iris's father, thanking him for the timely gift, and expressing hope for mutually beneficial outcomes in the spring cohort. The timeline was damning. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Ryan was spotted by reporters outside his co-working space in Tribeca. They bombarded him with questions about the thesis night, about his involvement in the scandal, about whether Iris had coordinated the blog post. He pushed past them, jaw tight, avoiding every camera. One photo showed him in profile, head down, coat collar raised, fleeing like someone running from a fire they'd started. Meanwhile, Iris doubled down. She posted an Instagram story from a rented studio with captions like, "Silence is compliance," and "Some people can't handle a woman with a voice." It backfired almost instantly. Columbia issued a rare public statement. While we support free speech, we firmly denounce personal attacks and unfounded allegations. The recent Solin Prize finalist was selected by an independent European jury. We stand by the integrity of her work. And just like that, the press turned. Julian asked if I wanted to do a formal interview. I said no. But I did agree to a press briefing. We rented a small modern auditorium in Midtown. Not a grand stage, just a clean space with room for 50 people and one glass lectern. I wore a crisp cream pantsuit with no jewelry. My hair tied back. No expression. Julian waited backstage. The cameras clicked softly as I stepped up. I wasn't going to speak, I said, steady and clear. I thought the work would speak for itself. But when someone decides to weaponize your story against you, silence isn't grace. It's permission. A few murmurs. I continued, "Let me be clear, I didn't fall. I was pushed. And then I built the staircase I used to climb back. No yelling. No dramatics. Just facts. I earned the Solin Prize finalist spot through work. Through talent. Through sacrifice no one else saw. I didn't buy it. I didn't seduce it. I built it. Line by line. Beam by beam." I looked straight into the lens of the front row camera. And I will not apologize for building something you thought I couldn't. I didn't take questions. I didn't need to. The next day I was on the cover of 2 architecture journals. The Woman Who Didn't Blink. From Thesis Ruin to Industry Reckoning, Maya Patel's Quiet Fire. Iris deactivated all her social platforms. Ryan released a one-line apology on his LinkedIn. I regret the pain I caused during a moment I handled poorly. I'm taking time to reflect. I didn't respond. Because the truth was, I didn't think about them anymore. Not in the quiet moments. Not when I walked into a meeting and saw the way the room shifted. Not when a little girl at a student design workshop asked, "Did you really build a building out of heartbreak?" I just smiled and said, "No. I built it out of truth." That Friday evening, I walked out of Columbia's administrative building after delivering my final lecture as a guest speaker. Julian was waiting outside. I stepped into the plaza. Students were gathered nearby, some whispering, some watching. This time they didn't look at me with curiosity or pity or gossip-hungry awe. They moved aside, cleared a path, as if the space I occupied had finally been carved out for me. And only me. The vote was scheduled for 9 a.m., but I arrived at Low Library an hour early. Not out of nerves, just habit. I needed to see the campus when it was still quiet, before the noise of opinions, policies, and the politics of academia filled every hallway. I sat in the courtyard alone, watching the way sunlight crept across the granite, slow and unapologetic. This place used to suffocate me. Now it felt like stone I'd carved my name into. Julian didn't come with me. He'd recused himself from all discussions surrounding the vote. Given up his temporary board seat. Walked away from every corridor of influence he'd once controlled so no one could say my success had anything to do with his shadow. I hadn't asked him to do it. But he did anyway. Because real love doesn't offer you power. It clears the space for your own. At 9:03 the doors opened. Professor Ames stepped out holding a sealed envelope and a clipboard. Her face was unreadable. "Maya," she said. "They've reached a decision." I stood, bracing myself for either outcome. "You've been officially reinstated as the top-ranked graduate of your year," she said, smiling gently. The vote was unanimous. For a moment I didn't breathe. Then I nodded. Once. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. But as I turned away from the building, past the pillars that once echoed with the sound of my humiliation, I felt something inside me settle. Not pride. Peace. I went straight to the cafe we always loved, the one tucked into the corner of West 114th. It had wobbly chairs and burned espresso, but it was ours. Julian was already there. He stood when I walked in. One look and he knew. "You did it," he said softly. "No," I replied, slipping into the seat across from him. They finally admitted I already had. His smile was quieter than usual. Something tender. Almost nervous. "I have something for you," he said. Before I could respond, he pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket and set it between us. No grand speech. No eyes watching. Just us. A table, 2 coffees, and the stillness between us that didn't need to be filled. I looked at him, startled. "Julian." He opened the box. Inside, a ring that looked like it had been drawn from my own hands. Platinum, delicate, with one singular diamond held by golden prongs shaped like open scaffolding. Like something still being built. Still becoming. "I didn't buy this because we're a headline," he said gently. "I bought it because the second I saw you fight for your voice, I realized I didn't want a life where you weren't part of every plan I make." He paused. "I don't want to be the man who saves you. I want to be the one who sees you. Who stays beside you while you build." My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the ring. "And if one day you want to sketch a future," he said, voice softer now, "I want it to begin here." He didn't kneel. He didn't ask a question. He just looked at me the way no one ever had, like he'd already said everything that mattered. I smiled, eyes stinging. Not from doubt. But from knowing. "I don't need saving," I said, voice thick. "But I want to build with someone who never once asked me to be small." He held his breath. "Yes," I whispered. "It's a yes." His shoulders dropped. His hand reached for mine. And when he slid the ring onto my finger, no audience, no applause, I felt nothing but clarity. Not possession. Not pressure. Just partnership. We walked the city until the sun dipped below the brownstones. We didn't talk about weddings or timelines. We talked about books we hadn't read, buildings we wanted to visit, the color of chairs in a future apartment we hadn't even looked for yet. We didn't plan the next chapter. We just lived it. That night, back on the rooftop of the studio building where it all began, we laid side by side on a blanket, heads tilted toward the stars. I reached for his hand. No declarations. No perfect words. Just the warmth of his palm against mine. And for the first time in years I didn't feel like I was trying to prove anything. Not to Columbia, not to the world, not even to myself. I didn't just feel whole. I felt ready. There were no seating charts. No flower walls. No Pinterest boards with aesthetic codes. Just a small garden courtyard in Brooklyn, encircled by ivy-covered brick and soft sunlight pouring in between old oak beams. 27 guests. A string quartet. And chairs arranged in a semicircle so everyone could see each other. No hierarchy, no front row. My wedding didn't look like a bridal magazine cover. But it felt exactly like home. I wore a cream and gold lehenga, hand-stitched with thread from my grandmother's sari. The dupatta rested gently across my shoulders, weighed not by tradition but by memory. I wore no diamonds. Just simple gold bangles that clicked together softly when I walked. Julian waited at the front, wearing a charcoal sherwani lined with golden buttons. He looked at me like time had folded in half. Like the world had finally come full circle. When we exchanged vows, there was no script. No priest. No sermon. Just the sound of leaves rustling and the quiet rise of emotion in our voices. I held his hands steady and said, "You never asked me to be less. Not quieter. Not simpler. Not easier to carry. You didn't rescue me. You walked beside me until I learned how to carry myself. And then you still stayed." Julian blinked once as if trying to memorize the moment. Then he said, "You made space for me where there was only fire. You taught me that silence can rebuild just as powerfully as a scream. And that love doesn't ask for attention, it asks for presence." We didn't kiss immediately. We stood there for a second too long, forehead to forehead, the way we always did when things were real and raw. Then we kissed. And the courtyard burst into applause. Not because we were perfect, but because we were honest. We didn't throw a reception. We threw open the doors to a long wooden table under string lights, with dinner passed in ceramic bowls and old friends trading stories like souvenirs. Julian toasted once. "I didn't marry the woman they talked about in the articles," he said. "I married the woman who rewrote them." The laughter was warm. So was the wine. I wore sneakers by the time dessert came out. Someone brought a guitar. And somewhere between the last song and the cab ride home, I realized no part of me was missing anymore. A month later I opened the door to my first office. A glass building tucked into the corner of the Arts District in Tribeca. Just a block from where Julian and I met, but a lifetime away in spirit. The plaque beside the entrance read, "Maya Patel Studio Sustainable Architecture Plus Design." The letters were etched in brushed gold. Not flashy. Not loud. Just permanent. I ran my fingers over the engraving and felt it settle into my skin like belonging. Inside, the space was still empty, no furniture yet. Just sunlit walls and a blueprint rolled out on the table. My first client? Columbia University. They were redesigning the East Campus Learning Annex, the very wing where my thesis had been overshadowed. Where I had once walked out humiliated. Now I was walking back in through a different door. The one I'd built myself. Julian dropped by that afternoon. He didn't bring flowers. He brought coffee and a new drafting compass. "I figured you'd need a tool that never loses its center," he said, grinning. I laughed and kissed him. Then I sat down at the table, unrolled the first sketch and pressed pencil to paper. Not to prove anything. Not to chase applause. But because this was what I loved. What I chose. What I reclaimed. I wasn't a headline anymore. I was a name on a door. And for the first time in a long time, the world felt like something I didn't have to fight to exist in. It felt like mine. The end.